Lucy Gayheart, Book 2, Chapter 10. The weeks can be very long in the Platte Valley, Lucy found. She began to feel trapped, shut up in a little town in winter. That long, soft, brooding autumn had been like a kind companion. Now the hard facts of country life were upon her. The weather grew windy and bitter cold. The town and all the country round were the color of cement. The tides that raced through the open world never came here. There was never anything to make one leap beyond oneself or to carry one away. One's mind got stuffy, like the houses. Toward the end of January came another heavy snowfall, then a thaw, followed by a week of biting cold. The street, the roads, the yard, the orchard were stretches of lumpy ice and frozen snow. Why didn't Professor Auerbach send for her now? If she could only walk past the Arts Building once again, see the hall porter and George, the elevator man. If she could go to the concert hall, where she had first heard Sebastian, sit in a corner and remember. Someday, she would be able to rent his old studio, and she would live there always. There must be ways of making money in this world. She had never seriously tried, but now she would. One morning, Pauline went down to help the Methodist women get the basement of the church ready for a chicken and waffle supper, so Lucy practiced at home. She had found she could if she were alone in the house. At noon, Pauline came in, resolutely cheerful. Her sister was a hard person to live with just now. When they sat down to lunch, she announced what she believed to be good news. "Lucy, my dear, I've done pretty well for you this morning. I've got 2 piano pupils for you." Lucy looked up and grew red. "Pupils? I don't want any. I'm not going to teach in Haverford." Pauline didn't flush. She grew paler. "But seriously, Lucy, don't you think you ought to be doing something? You must know that Father gets deeper into debt all the time. We made a great sacrifice to send you away to study. I always supposed you'd want to pay back at least part of what it cost us." "I will, sometime. I can't see that anybody made a great sacrifice. It was Father's own idea that I should study music. I was never extravagant, certainly. I got along on less than most of the students." Her careless tone made her sister indignant. "More than $1,600 you cost us in those first 2 years. I have the check stubs, and I know." "So much as that?" Lucy asked in the same indifferent manner. "That is a great deal for us. You might have sent back just a little after you began to earn something to show your good intentions." I thought of it, but I bought clothes instead. When I was teaching, I had to be decently dressed." Both the sisters had stopped eating, and both were making a pretense of drinking coffee. Pauline went on to say, as mildly as she could, that she had thought Lucy would like to take a few pupils, now that she was feeling better. "People here have always appreciated you. I wonder you haven't had applications before this. I'm afraid some of Fairy Blair's talk must have got around." Lucy knew that she could go away and avoid a scene, but she didn't care. "Just what do you mean?" she asked coldly. The same thing happened to Pauline's face that happened to sour milk when she poured boiling water into it to make cottage cheese. It clabbered. The flesh curdled. "The stories about you and that singer. Such things will get out, and Fairy isn't one to keep them. Now people are saying that when Harry Gordon went to Chicago last spring and saw how things were, he threw you over." Lucy laughed disagreeably. "Threw me over, did he? Well, one story is as good as another. I don't care what they say." "So you kept Father's check stubs, Pauline? How like you. You needn't worry. I'm going back to teach under Auerbach again. It's been arranged for weeks. The date is set for March, but I can easily go sooner. She had risen and was standing against the light of the window. Pauline broke out bitterly. "Lucy, why are you so mean? Why do you hide things from us and treat us like strangers?" "I suppose I feel that way," Lucy said as she went up the back stairs. While Pauline was washing the dishes, she cried a little, shed a few waxy tears that came hard. "You brought a child up, slaved for her, and dressed her prettily, did all the work, and let her have all the holidays, the parlor cat and the kitchen cat. And this was what came of it. You coddled her as if she were a superior being, and she treated you like the housekeeper. And she used to be so proud of her little sister." When Pauline left the kitchen and came into the sitting room, she looked out of the window to see who might be passing. Why, there was Lucy, in her hat and coat, out of doors, out in the road, hurrying away from the house and walking toward the country. And she was carrying something in a black bag. Could it be her skating shoes? Pauline caught up a shawl and ran out into the yard. "Lucy!" she called, then louder, "Lucy, wait!" But Lucy never turned. She seemed indeed to quicken her pace. Pauline went back into the house, just the way she used to run off when she was little. She dropped her shawl. "I wonder if she knows the old skating place was ruined last spring when the river changed its bed. She'll have her walk for nothing. Surely she wouldn't be crazy enough to try the ice out there." The bank had been torn up by the flood, and anyone could see that the river itself now flowed where the shallow arm used to be. Pauline considered telephoning the liveryman to drive out after Lucy and tell her she wouldn't find any skating. But Lucy might be very much annoyed at any such interference. Probably it was the walk she wanted. Pauline remembered how she used to shut her eyes to Lucy's truancies. The child usually got over her tempers out on the high road, but if she were shut up for a punishment, it only made her worse. End of Chapter 10, Book 2, Lucy Gayheart. Lucy Gayheart, Book 2, Chapter 11. Lucy found the walking bad enough. The roads had been rutted during the thaw, and afterwards the deep cuts made by the wagon wheels had frozen hard. Yesterday's snowfall had packed into them. Her foot kept catching in the walls of the ruts. On either side of the wheel tracks, the mud had frozen in jagged ridges, rough and sharp like mushroom coral. Since yesterday, a few countrymen had been abroad, and the horses' hooves had not yet broken down these frozen incrustations. Lucy couldn't remember that her feet had ever got so cold when she was walking, but this was not walking really, it was plodding and breaking through. She was going west, directly against the wind, and she had often to turn and stand still to catch her breath. After she was a mile out of town, not a single sleigh or wagon passed her. It was still too early for the farmers, who'd gone to town in the morning, to be driving homeward. The country looked very dreary, certainly, if only the sun would break through, but it made a mere glassy white spot in the low gray sky. In that cold light, even the fresh snow looked gray, and the frozen weed sticking up through it. In the draws, between the low hills, thickets of wild plum bushes were black against the drifts. They should have been thatched with yesterday's snow, but today's sharp wind had stripped them bare. After the first mile, Lucy began to feel very tired. The wind seemed to blow harder out here in the open country. It brought the tears to her eyes, and she had to keep wiping them away to see the road clearly. At last she determined to beg a ride from anyone who came by, even if he was going toward town. It was almost too cold to skate, and there would be that long walk home. She had got over another mile when she heard the sound of sleigh bells behind her. She turned her back to the wind and listened. Only one man in the country had such bells. It must be Harry Gordon. There was no place to hide. She wouldn't hide. Perhaps this was the chance she'd been hoping for. She stepped behind a telephone post and waited. She felt even colder than before, and her heart beat fast. She was afraid, after all. There he came in his cutter, over the brow of a hill, down into a draw where he was lost in sight, then out on the very hill upon which she was standing. She stepped into the middle of the road, in front of him, and held up her hand. He pulled in his horses and stopped. Harry, oh, Harry, could you give me a lift as far as Thompson's pasture? I find it's pretty rough walking. She was standing with her back to the wind, her skirts blown forward, holding her muff against her cheek. She looked very slight and appealing out there all alone. Harry's eyes were watery from the cold. He seemed more than ever to look at her through glasses. He began in that voice of cheery friendliness, which meant nothing at all, with the usual shade of surprise in it. Well, now, I'm just awfully sorry, but I'm not going out that way at all. I turn north right here at the corner. I have an important appointment with the man up in Harlem. I'm nearly an hour late as it is, and I've got to make up time on the road. Wish I weren't in such a hurry. He touched his fur cap with his glove and drove on. Lucy sent one cry after him. Just one cry, angry and imperious. Harry! As if she had the right to call him back. His big shoulders never moved. His sharp-shod horses trotted on, the sleigh bells singing, and turned north at the section corner 100 yards away. The cutter with the upright seated figure moved along against the gray, snow-drifted pasture land, until at last it disappeared behind a group of distant straw stacks. When Lucy next stopped to take breath, she found herself a long way nearer the river bend. For a moment, she had leaned against the telephone post back yonder, but only for a moment. Such a storm of pain and anger boiled up in her that she felt strong enough to walk into the next county. Her blood was racing, and she was no longer conscious of the cold. She forgot to look where she put her feet. They took care of themselves. She couldn't have imagined such rudeness, such an insult. She was young. She was strong. She would show them they couldn't crush her. She would get away from these people who were cruel and stupid as the frozen mud in the road. If she let herself think, she would cry. She must not give in to it. She must hurry on. When she reached the riverbank, she sat down just long enough to take off her walking shoes and put on the other pair with skates attached. Her hands trembled so that she could scarcely pull the leather laces taut and tie them. She was angry with herself, too, that she should have given him the chance to leave her in the road, as he had left her in the dining room that night in Chicago. But how could anyone be armed against such boorishness and spite? Catching up a stick, she got to her feet and took a few long strokes close to the shore. She was not looking about her. She saw nothing. She would get away from this frozen country and these frozen people and go back to light and freedom such as they could never know. Without looking or thinking, she struck toward the center for smoother ice. A soft splitting sound brought her to herself in a flash, and she saw dark lines running in the ice about her. She turned sharply, but the cracks ran ahead of her. A sheet of ice broke loose and tipped, and she plunged to her waist into cold water. Lucy was more stimulated than frightened. She'd got herself into a predicament, and she must keep her wits about her. The water couldn't be very deep. She still had both elbows on the ice. As soon as she touched bottom, she could manage. It never occurred to her that this was the river itself. She was groping cautiously with her feet when she felt herself gripped from underneath. Her skate had caught in the fork of a submerged tree, half buried in sand by the spring flood. The ice cake slipped from under her arms and let her down. At 3:30, when the wind had grown so bitter, Pauline telephoned her father to drive out and pick up Lucy on the West Road. Mr. Gayheart went to the livery barn a few doors from his shop and told Gulford, the driver, to put in 2 horses. Then he asked his friend the tailor to go with him for a sleigh ride. Mr. Gayheart was not a man to look for trouble. But as they drove on, and still did not meet his daughter, he grew uneasy. When they reached the place on the shore from which the young people used to go skating, they found the ice out in the stream cracked and broken. So she couldn't have tarried here. She must have taken some other road or gone to pay a call at one of the farms. The driver noticed something out where the ice was bad. He said it looked like a red scarf. Mr. Gayheart jumped out of the sleigh. He contradicted Gulford, but begged him to look again, to go out on the ice. I'm a little afraid to go out there, Mr. Gayheart. It's rotten. But don't get excited. Stay where you are, and I'll have a look around. Gulford went slowly along the shore, considering what was to be done. He knew that was a scarf out there. Presently he stopped and bent over. Under a willow bush at the river's edge, he found a pair of shoes and overshoes. He called Schneider, the tailor, and asked him to stay here with Mr. Gayheart until he whipped up his team and went to the neighboring farms for help. In less than an hour, farm wagons and sleds were coming toward the river, bringing ropes, poles, lanterns, hay rakes. One wagon brought a heavy rowboat that had been used in times of freshet. It was already dark, and the men who had come together agreed they could do nothing until morning. Mr. Gayheart kept begging them to try, declaring that he would not leave the riverbank that night. While the older men talked and hesitated, 4 young lads dragged the old boat out into the rotten ice and groped below with their poles and hay rakes. It did not take them a great while. The sunken tree that had caught Lucy's skate still held her there. She had not been swept on by the current. When Harry Gordon and his singing sleigh bells came over the hills from Harlem that night, he overtook a train of lanterns and wagons crawling along the frozen land. In one of those wagons, they were taking Lucy Gayheart home. End of chapter 11, book 2, Lucy Gayheart. And it's also the end of book 2.